Over the years, Africa has been a source of important resources to the world. Many of these resources have been forcefully taken. Foreign powers have installed systems to cheaply extract gold, diamonds, copper, oil, and many more from the continent. Africa has been repeatedly exploited, from the colonial posts of the 16th century to the organized coups of the 1970s that placed convenient dictators in power. Recently, one particular form of exploitation has gained public attention: the use of mercenary groups by foreign powers to secure gold, diamonds, and oil on the continent. Today, if we think about mercenary in Africa, the first thing that comes to mind is the Russian Wagner Group. However, they are not the first nor the last mercenaries to see Africa as a path to wealth. Long before Wagner founder Prigozhin was born, the business model of using armed men to secure goods in Africa was already prevalent. The French, Dutch, British, Germans, and Americans were taking advantage of Africa long before the Russian warlord made his billions in the continent. In this video, I will provide a timeline of the business of mercenaries in Africa. I will discuss the evolution of their activities and share the stories of the pioneers of this method of enrichment. First, let's start with a clear definition. What is a mercenary? According to international humanitarian law, this term typically refers to individuals who sell their services to countries in need as freelancers. They directly participate in hostilities for private gain and are usually paid more than combatants in the local armed forces. They are not nationals or residents of territories in the conflict and are not members of their national armed forces. Before Europeans had to rely on private companies to extract resources, they simply took control of the entire lands. The period of colonial expansion by European powers outside of the coastal areas in Africa began around 1880 and lasted until the independence of these African states in the 1960s. During these 80 years, Europe had total control over most of the continent and could easily exploit its resources. However, after independence, Europe had to find new ways of mining and extracting the resources they had become accustomed to. This is where the modern mercenaries started to emerge, and it all began with a veteran from the British Army named David Stirling. David Stirling is a Scottish officer and veteran of the Special Air Service in the British Army. He is a renowned figure in the sphere of private military companies. Stirling pioneered this unique industry by establishing WatchGuard International, the world's first private military company. The company primarily operated in Yemen, Saudi Arabia, and Oman. It was involved in an attempt to overthrow the government of Congo and also provided training teams and security advice in Zambia and Sierra Leone. WatchGuard International introduced a new concept in global security. As a private company available for military and security purposes, it offered various services. This bold business model capitalized on the instability and conflicts present in many parts of the world, particularly in Africa. As mentioned earlier, the company's operations in Congo during the Cold War played a significant role in the emergence of modern mercenaries in Africa. Mike Hoare was born on March 17, 1919, before acquiring the nickname Mad Mike. He ran several businesses in South Africa. In 1961, he met Congolese businessman and politician Moise Tshombe. At the time, Tshombe was the president of the secessionist state of Katanga. The two men hit it off and became partners, working together on an ambitious plan to overthrow Congo's leader, Patrice Lumumba. Lumumba had sought military aid from the Soviet Union to suppress the secessionist movement in the mineral-rich province, making him an enemy of Tshombe. Tshombe promised to offer lucrative state contracts to Hoare's companies in exchange for his assistance. With the help of Mad Mike's mercenary force, known as Five Commando, Moise Tshombe became the Prime Minister of Congo 3 years later. As the Cold War escalated, the two friends found powerful allies who wanted to counter the communist movement that persisted even after Lumumba's death. They were determined to suppress the communist-backed Simba rebellion. Hoare's Five Commando consisted of over 500 soldiers recruited from France, Germany, South Africa, Ireland, and elsewhere. Nicknamed the Wild Geese, these fighters' involvement in suppressing the rebellion later inspired the 1978 fictional film. However, Tshombe's tenure as prime minister was marked by political turmoil and instability, leading to his downfall. As a result, Hoare and Tshombe went their separate ways. This was just the beginning of Hoare's adventures in Africa. The former businessman, now known as Mad Mike, continued to exploit instability for profit across the continent. His own downfall came 2 decades later during a failed coup d'etat in the Seychelles. In 1981, Hoare was hired by the South African intelligence agencies, who provided him with weapons and logistical support to orchestrate a coup attempt in the Seychelles. The objective was to bring back the country's pro-Western former president James Manchem to power and remove the socialist incumbent France Albert Rene. They called themselves the Froth Blowers. Unfortunately for Mad Mike, they were exposed when an airport inspector discovered a weapon in their luggage upon landing, leading to a gunfight. Hoare was arrested, convicted, and sentenced to 20 years in prison. During his trial, Hoare claimed to have been paid $100,000 for his involvement in the coup by an unknown party. Hoare served only 3 years in jail before relocating to France, where he lived a quiet life for 20 years before returning to South Africa in 2009. Mad Mike passed away on February 2nd, 2020, in Durban, South Africa, at the age of 100. Even if it looks like it, Mad Mike was not the greatest mercenary Africa would ever see. This title goes to a Frenchman. Gilbert Bourgeot preferred to describe himself as a corsair. Historically, the corsairs in France would receive written permission from the king to attack foreign ships. Bourgeot explained, "I didn't have such permission, but I had passports given to me by France intelligence services." Gilbert chose his own war name, Bob Denard. Dennard and his followers, known as the Dreadful, saw their first action in Congo. They will later expand in Nigeria, Benin, Chad, Angola, Rwanda, and several times in the Comoros. Over the years, Dennard claimed that many of his activities had the tacit approval of the French government. Like Mad Mike, Bob Denard began his mercenary career when he signed up in 1961 to train forces involved in the effort by the province of Katanga to secede from the government of Congo. In late 1965, the mercenary reappeared in Congo, this time fighting on the side of strongman Mobutu Sese Seko, a one-time opponent of the Katanga regime. Following the money, Dennard had switched sides. This would be a common theme in his story. Congo President Mobutu consolidated power and declared himself president in November of 1965. President Mobutu, fearing the white mercenaries still lingering in the country, asked his friend Bob Denard to help disarm the notorious foreign fighter Jacques Schramm, nicknamed Blackjack. In the late 1970s, instead of listening to Mobutu, Dennard switched sides again. He joined Blackjack, and the two mercenaries unsuccessfully tried to overthrow President Mobutu. The coup attempt failed when the mercenaries ran into a platoon of North Korean soldiers who were guarding the airport in Kinshasa. Schramm and Dennard were arrested and charged with treason, but due to their deep connection with the powerful governments, they were released and allowed to leave the country. Soon after, in Gabon, Dennard succeeded in putting his buddy Omar Bongo in power to secure a much-needed oil supply for France. Dennard was tasked with creating a presidential guard for Omar Bongo's security. Gabon became a rear base for Dennard and his mercenaries, and the Gabon president even entrusted him with managing large agricultural estates. This marked the beginning of mercenaries taking on more significant roles beyond just protection. With the help of the French government, Dennard did not stop there. In Guinea, he assisted the opposition to President Sékou Touré's socialist government by training volunteer fighters at a camp in France. In Mauritania, he established the Presidential Guard of Mokhtar Ould Dada, another friend of France. Bob Denard left his biggest mark in Comoros. The islands were a French colony until July 1975, when Ahmed Abdallah, founder of his own political party, became the first president of the newly independent nation, but his presidency did not last long. In 1976, he was overthrown by Bob Denard, acting on behalf of a man named Ali Soili. Ali Soili offered Dennard a $15,000 advance in exchange for his help in raising an army. Dennard called upon old cronies from Gabon and France, purchased 10 tons of weapons, ammunition, and other supplies. Dennard and his mercenaries flew to a neighboring island and laid siege to Abdallah in his villa. The president surrendered. Soili gave Abdallah a passport and $1 million, making him swear to never re-enter politics. Abdallah accepted and left for Paris. Sirleaf managed to hold on for 2 years, surviving no fewer than 4 attempted coups. Proud of his success in Comoros, in 1977, Bob Denard became involved in a coup attempt in Benin. Dennard's hasty attack on the Benin leader faltered after just 3 hours. He left behind mercenaries, weapons, and documents signed by France's secret services that described his entire battle plan. Dennard was injured during the fight and was evacuated back to Paris. Meanwhile, the former president of Comoros, Abdallah, allied in Paris with 2 wealthy Comoran businessmen. Together, they came up with a surprising plan, hiring the man who had overthrown Abdallah 2 years earlier to restore him to power. They called upon Dennard. This marked at least the 3rd time in his career that he switched sides in a conflict. Dennard quickly spent millions of dollars recruiting and arming his troops with the conspirators' money. They set sail from France in March and slipped ashore on May 13, 1978, wearing black uniforms. They found President Sirleaf drunk in bed, and Abdallah resumed his interrupted presidency. 16 days later, the imprisoned Sirleaf was killed by Dennard's men. Dennard reaped the rewards, becoming the chief of a 500-strong presidential guard. Effectively the military of the Comoros, he was widely seen as the true power in the Comoros and reached the pinnacle of his mercenary career, having influential friends all over the continent. Bob Denard died on October 13, 2007 in Paris at the age of 78. He laid the foundation for the mercenaries who would come and demonstrated to ambitious Europeans the business model of providing security to governments in exchange for a percentage on the resources exploited by those governments. One of the companies that followed in his footsteps and expanded the capacities of this business model was Executive Outcomes. Founded a decade later in 1989 by Eben Barlow, a former officer in the South African Defense Force, Executive Outcomes, EO, is a company that has access to a range of equipment, including cargo and troop carriers, light aircraft, and surveillance equipment. This allowed EO to operate efficiently and effectively in African conflicts like the civil wars in Angola in the 1990s and in Sierra Leone. In Angola, EO utilized sophisticated equipment such as helicopter gunships, converted troop carriers, and L-39 trainer jet fighters. The company also operated several light aircraft and 2 Boeing 727 from airports in Johannesburg and Malta. Through troop training and other support, EO is credited with helping to turn the tide in favor of government forces during that conflict. EO works closely with another company named Heritage Oil and Gas, directed by Tony Buckingham, a founding partner of Executive Outcomes. Heritage Oil and Gas received valuable oil concessions in Angola. EO was highly effective in supporting the government in war-torn Angola, which led to interest from other African countries, including Sierra Leone. In Sierra Leone, EO was hired in the mid-1990s to assist government forces in their fight against Revolutionary United Front rebels. The company effectively acted as a military battalion for hire and was one of the most prominent private military corporations of its time. The EO deployed a few hundred fighters, most of whom were veterans of the South African Army, to drive the rebels out of major diamond fields and dismantle their jungle strongholds. Thanks to EO's involvement, the Sierra Leone government forces were able to secure a peace treaty and hold elections. The reason African countries do not hesitate to use private military companies is simple: cost. For example, securing Freetown with 300 EO troops in Sierra Leone cost $36 million, while the mission of 8,000 to 14,000 UN troops, who later had to withdraw from the capital after failing, required a budget of $500 million. The new business model behind mercenary companies is straightforward. They secure a region and gain access to its resources with the help of related companies that have preferential contracts directly from the country's government. It's a win-win situation that has left all parties involved satisfied for many years. While the African country gains access to advanced military equipment and expertise, the mercenaries receive a percentage or complete access to valuable resources. While Sierra Leone paid Executive Outcomes to fight the rebels, the government also awarded diamond mining rights to Branch Energy, another firm linked to Executive Outcomes through cross-ownership, among a group of former South African and British military officers. While Executive Outcomes provided security in Kono, the country's richest diamond region, Branch Energy carried out mining operations there. Many companies have benefited from coups over the years and have provided assistance in securing lucrative resources in Africa, like Asgard, a German private security company. Asgard is primarily active in Sudan, Nigeria, Libya, Mauritania, and Egypt. Another company is Dyck Advisory Group, DAG, which was founded by Lionel Dyck, a former colonel in the Zimbabwean military. DAG offers a range of services. Its most recent and high-profile involvement was in the violent insurgency in northern Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province, which was backed by the Islamic State. DAG was called in to assist Mozambican authorities in 2020. Their one-year contract was reportedly set to end in early April 2021. DAG achieved some success during its time in Mozambique as they arrived after the forces of the Russian PMC Wagner Group had been routed by the extremists. The Wagner Group had deployed forces to Mozambique in 2019 to assist Mozambican authorities. As you probably know, Wagner are also active in Libya, Sudan, the Central African Republic, Madagascar, and Mali. In exchange for their services, they receive lucrative natural resource contracts and a foothold in these countries. As of 2023, Russia's Wagner Group is one of the most active and notorious private military companies operating on the African continent. Just like Bob Denard in France, the Wagner Group is an example of a private organization being used as a national proxy to gain influence in foreign nations without facing the scrutiny that usually comes with official government and military channels. Similar to Executive Outcomes and Dyck Advisory Group, the Wagner Group utilizes proxy companies to gain access to resources in exchange for providing security. This business model is prevalent across the continent, with multiple outside companies adopting it. The presence of mercenaries in Africa has a long history, starting with people like Mike Hoare and David Stirling. It evolved to include the sophisticated use of secret services like France and Bob Denard. Mercenaries have played a significant role in African history, facilitating coups and solidifying America and European presence on the continent. Russia and Wagner are not the first, and they will not be the last mercenary group to exploit the instability in Africa. This system was created and perfected first by colonial powers, and changing it will require substantial effort. The recent increase in coups in our continent, like in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon, may be a sign of change, suggesting that Africa is ready to finally retake full control of its own resources. Do you agree? Share your thoughts in the comments. Over the years, various groups have taken advantage of Africa's resources. I created this timeline to provide more context as we witness a new wave of changes on our continent. If you found this video interesting, don't forget to hit the like button. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.